unless we're doing, unless we're involved in like organized crime.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fire Pit Chat with Ben and Joe. I'm Joe. Hey, Ben, how are you?
Hey man, good to be back.
All right, so we're wrapping up our fourth in a series of our election day coverage or election week coverage. We've been talking a lot. We started out with talking about hate and how I can work with that inside myself. We looked at the Serenity Prayer, and in our last episode we talked about the 312 and 70 network, I'll call it, and gave Ben and I share with you just a little bit of an overview. And that was more theoretical, right? So how it works, and there were some practical things. But we wanted to do for this episode, we know today's election day, talk about some of the practical ways that we can potentially, or I can look at creating a network, and why. I think we covered in the last episode why. Certainly there may be disappointment, there may be anger, there may be upsetment with what happened or didn't happen, for you, with your candidate. And the idea here is that we can come together and grow and be together as a community and perhaps affect change and get that internal peace that we may be looking for and want that to share with others. And we may be upset, we may be frustrated, but that idea that we can come together and be together, I think that's at least that's our goal in general, I think, and certainly goal of this election day coverage that we're doing.
Yeah, I think one thing, Joe, I've been thinking about, part of what we're poking at here a little bit is really what is politics. North America tends to be, politics is basically two parties and some smaller parties kind of duking it out for major positions of public office. The old idea of politics was it's just the art of living together. And in that more organic definition, it's never a spectator sport. It's not something we watch on TV. It's something we're doing every day. And, I think these conversations about our attitudes of our heart, whether we're controlled by hate or have inner peace. And now as we're talking about this idea of circles of influence, networks of influence through kind of 3, 12, 70, and so on, what we're really talking about is the old idea of politics, relational networks and communities, how they work, how we can be participants in those and really do good. And you know what the truth is? The result of this election is not going to change our ability to do any of that.
Right.
Which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's the hope part, right? I mean, that's where we can have hope if we're disappointed, or if our candidate won and the change that we are putting on that person to make doesn't happen, right? How many times are election promises not kept or things aren't done? So it gives us some hope that we can actually bring this this tool or this resource or this structure or framework into our lives and become active participants in our lives in a way that's different than we are when we tweet or post on Facebook. Right? We had an earlier episode on that where it's, am I really doing anything if I send a tweet? So here's actually some tools, some resources, a framework on how I could actually begin to do some of these things that I'm passionate about and do them in a constructive way as opposed to a destructive way.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of what's happening today, just my opinion, is it's destructive. And so the destruction is never going to be sustainable because destruction, you're eventually going to destroy everything.
Yes.
But if we're constructing, if we're building, then it's sustainable. And so these are some tools for us to be able to do that and to share with you in some areas. So if you didn't hear the earlier episode from yesterday, it was about the 312 or 70 network. We're just going to cover that. And because I think some people might hear that and say, oh, yeah, well, I do that in church. And it's good. That's great. But there's other ways to look at this and ways we could bring this into other areas of our life, our family life, right? Even despite the size, large or small, of our family, we could be in how we even see our family and what is our core mission, right? Is our family centered around the Lord? At work, I mean, most jobs have a mission. How are we doing this at work? Are we, and if we're serving the company's mission and we believe in the mission, isn't that a way of serving God as well? Right? Because when we don't know who we can reach, we may be the only copy. You may be, if you believe in this, you may be the only copy of the Bible that somebody sees, and it's how you live and carry on your life. And certainly in the community, right? There are community organizations that need. I was part of the Little League here in my town for 8 years on the board, and I served as president. And we were always looking for volunteers and people that were focused on providing the best situation for our young people to play sports.
Yeah.
And I was elbow to elbow with many men and women in the community who
Yep.
worked very, very hard and thankless, didn't get paid. But
Yep.
I shouldn't say thankless, because the thanks was in the outcome.
Yep.
So when we'd be there on a Saturday or a Tuesday night and seeing these kids running around, it always felt good. Some of these tools that we can do. So the election may be primary in our mind, and we may be like, what did we lose? What did we lose? Or what did, there's so much more work to do, and maybe some of those things is we can see some tools how we could bring that to ourselves to build ourselves up, and as we said in the last episode, Ben, you had said it, spread it out to the community.
So we're not just sitting around waiting for politicians to do stuff. We have wonderful things to do right in front of us. So yeah.
All right, so why don't we take first look at a family life, and we talk about the concept of the three being in an inner circle, and I had mentioned, if our kids are young, we may not consider them an inner circle. I wouldn't necessarily want to tell my child that I'm having problems with certain things, or maybe in general may not be appropriate in a
Hmm.
parental child relationship. But certainly, if I'm an adult and a grown man, and my parents are, that may be okay. But if we're looking at that inner circle, when we look at family, really could be, and hopefully is your spouse,
Yep.
could be siblings, it could be your parents if you're old enough, could be a
Hmm.
cousin, an aunt and uncle, really depending on the family. But I think that the family life, especially now, because it seems like the family life is fragmenting a bit, so
Yep.
the family life would benefit from having an inner circle. There's people that hold the family to such a high regard, that's centered around the mission, and sometimes the mission may be just being a family.
Yeah, without question. I actually think family life is one of the places where you most clearly see this 3-12-70 thing. You see it generationally, so a marriage is the 3, the children are the 12, the grandchildren are the 70. That's pretty obvious. You also see it, though, within a snapshot of time where there's my family, but then there's my siblings and their families, and then there's cousins and, aunts and uncles. And the family trees are literally 3-12-70 kind of, man, just something as simple as doing the work of building healthy bonds at each level, whether it's in your marriage, with your kids, with your siblings, with your parents, with your cousins, and there are different levels of intimacy there just naturally. Working to make them healthy, just having a family tree in which there is healing. I mean, families always have ruptures, but where there's healing, there's reconciliation, there's the generational transfer of wisdom, hopefully. We're not at war with our kids or our parents, right?
Right.
I just think there's a lot there. And wonderfully, a family tree like that has such a place in it for people even who don't marry and have children. There's this wonderful verse in Psalms that says God puts the solitary in families. There really is never such thing as a single person who has no place in a community, because God has
Right.
built us to have community to matter. Whether we marry or have children or not, it doesn't really matter. We've got some kind of roots, and if and I think actually in the church we should be very awake to the fact that if people end up being cut off from their families, let's bring them into one of ours. you know so there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, so my family, we're Italian and Polish, but we are very demonstrative. We always have been, my brothers and sisters and I. And if I see my brother, or if my brother sees me or my sister, we always hug each other.
Mhm.
And I think without even realizing it, to me, that's part of the three in
Yep.
this, is that I've had friends look at me and said, I've never hugged my brother.
Yes.
I said, no, we'll hug or we'll kiss each other. Like, there's a natural part there
Yep.
there's this feeling of we are a family. We're centered on that mission, even if sometimes and there are fractures, certainly,
Hmm.
but that idea, and to your point, is somebody who didn't have that maybe would see that in your family, part of that 70,
Yeah.
and say, I'm going to go and hug my brother. I'm going to go hug my
Yes.
sister. I'm going to go, hug my mom or dad. And
Yes.
so that's a way that this can spread out.
Absolutely. And there are just so many other examples like that of deeply attractive, and I would even say contagious, just affection, honor, forbearance, the kinds of things you just have to work out in a family, because, what are you going to do? It's hard to run away from family.
Right. Absolutely. And certainly as families age, right? There are going to be moments of grief where somebody
Yep.
passes on or is missing, or different issues that the families run into. And certainly,
Yep.
I've heard many stories in this season, right? Many families are split along political
Mm.
lines, and so how do we get back to the family? That's my brother, that's my sister, that's my mom or
Yes.
dad, my cousin.
Yes.
How do we get to that commonality that we talked about earlier? How
Yep.
do we get back to that commonality? Because the greater good, the long game on this is that we are a family,
Mm.
and that'll never change. And we're putting this family for a reason.
It would be interesting, maybe in another context, to explore why it is that we are sometimes willing to have our political bonds be the fundamental bonds in our life, where we actually would even be willing to sacrifice family bonds on the altar of political bonds. That's a curious dynamic. It seems to me it's got things backwards somehow.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd love to say that I've only heard about that, but
uh,
so there's five children in my and my family there. So yeah, we fit out the spectrum, but I think
mhm.
that yeah, if we can get back to that, so part of that 312 and 70 is we bring it back to that. What's our mission, and
Yep.
then how does that work out? And there may be people that there may be factions within the family that believe one way or another, and that's okay in their own
Yep.
groups of three. But there's this overarching, connection that's a family.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
if we shift over to work life, and certainly, when I thought about work life, I said, well, should I go in and work with a Bible, or or have Bible study at lunch, and that might be. I mean, depending on where your work environment is. But I was thinking as a work life as it's a way in recovery. There's that, and I've talked about this before, that this concept of attraction and not promotion,
Hmm.
meaning I act a certain way, I'll attract more people than if I tell them what I'm doing.
Yep.
And so I think, in the work life, there may be an opportunity there, especially we were talking about mission. Each job has a mission. And if you believe in that mission, we can perhaps make our work life better. We spend a lot of time at work, right?
Hmm.
And people are depending on our line or purchasing our services, and they want good services or goods that are withstanding. So I think we can bring this. I think it's powerful to bring this into the work
Yes.
environment and shift the work environment and from being drudgery, and it may be. I don't know what everyone's job is, but I believe if you bring that centeredness in, there's a real chance to change the work and the workforce, and really change the experience of work and working with other people.
Yes. And I think it's actually helpful here to just note that as as Christians, I mean, you and I are coming at this from a Christian background. Our our sense of what matters in our work is not just tied to whether or not we can bring an explicit religious influence into our workplace. The work, unless we're doing, unless we're involved in like organized crime, the work itself is good, right? I mean, just the things that businesses do. I mean, it's just part of the goodness. It's bringing goodness to a human society, whether it's literal goods or some kind of service or whatever. And so, like you're saying, our contribution both to the relational and emotional atmosphere of our workplace, but also our contribution to the skill and wisdom and productivity with which the work itself is done. All of this is good stuff. God made us to do these kinds of things. It's just really what we mean by cultural work, cultivating work in the world. And so, again, I think in workplaces, you very often see there's almost always this 312 70 pattern where you usually got, kind of a core group of, usually leadership in some kind of work environment. There's usually a core of a leader team. There's, what we call middle management. There's, the whole organization of people as a whole. And, learning to work within those dynamics and in my own way, in my own little circle, I probably have, certain coworkers that I am closer to, and then others that we maybe, we know each other fairly well. We're on a first name basis, and then there might be other employees I don't really know very well, but they're still part of the larger thing I'm a part of. And learning how to bring into that my own quietness of heart before God, my interest in the well-being of others, my eagerness to work well, to be a skilled worker, to do the very best job I can. Maybe I end up sort of developing within an organization, within a work context. I end up developing a whole I might have a whole area of development I might be a part of, whatever that looks like in your particular vocation. I just think that, there's a lot there. And I think this tends to happen fairly naturally, but just being conscious of it and working with it.
Yeah, it's creation versus destruction. I'll bring that up
Yes.
again. It's what can we
Yes.
do creatively? So part of work is right creatively find solutions to things,
Mm.
whatever those things are. And it's that spirit, I think, and I think that's what comes from God, right? That spirit of creation versus destruction,
Yes.
right? Of
Yeah.
love instead of hate. So
Yep.
how can I create we spend 40 hours a week at work, some of us, right? And if we're still in an office setting, or even if we're working from
Mm.
home, we're working with people. And so how do I bring that creation more and more into the world and
Yeah.
get away from destruction?
It'd be a fascinating conversation too about leadership culture, how leadership can promote that. How can you help people say, you know what? I think you guys over here have kind of formed a little three, and I think you should, kind of spread that idea you've got to maybe some others, and maybe form a team, and learning how to equip and empower people within an organization to, hey, look, form a three, form a 12. Maybe this ends up being even a spin off. Like we're not super territorial. If somebody's got a great idea, empower them to run with it. It's just anyway. That's a whole other conversation. But it can, again, as you put it, and I think that's precisely right. The goal is creation. It's growth. It's flourishing. And boy, when you're working in a place where that is what everybody's that's what's pumping in their veins. There's a lot of energy.
Yeah, and this is a real place where we can so bring the concept of 312 and 70 into the community, or
Hmm.
or let's say in a place outside of church, right? So
Yep.
church and family may lend itself to that, but here at work and in our greater community, here's a place where we can really begin to do that. And you've talked a
Absolutely.
lot about inviting people in. Don't necessarily invite them to church, which is fine, but invite them to a barbecue,
Yeah.
right? Invite them in. And so here's a way where we can begin to
Hmm.
have some of those virtues and those ideals, those things in the world, because we're part of it. Those are some of the things that I can change and I could bring
Right.
to the world, to work, and into our to the community. And
Yep.
when we look at the community, certainly I know I said my involvement in the Little League. Again, this may be a little bit restricted now or constrained because of the pandemic and different parts of that. But I also see that in the community there's room for great ideas.
Oh
There
yeah.
could be something. Hey, I got this great idea. I want to talk about this.
Yep.
We've seen some creativity now with watch parties and other
Hmm.
things going on. So there's
Hmm.
ways I think to bring that into the community, but to again bring that with the idea of creation. So I'm not going to do something that tells you how rotten something is, but
Hmm.
I'm going to try to create and say, look, this is a wonderful thing. I want to share it with you.
Yes. Yeah. And I think almost every meetup you look at, every startup company you look at, there's kind of this general model of, things start with a few enthusiasts, and the enthusiasm spreads to a, slightly bigger group of enthusiasts. And then, sometimes you end up with a whole big thing that comes out of it. And it's actually okay if it never reaches the 70 thing. Sometimes it's just okay for it to be small and intimate. I mean, but I think it's just an awareness that ideas and missions naturally grow. And we're just looking for every constructive opportunity to be a part of that. I mean, your Little League example is perfect. You have influence with your fellow coaches, you have a lot of influence with those particular players on your team. You might not have so much influence on the league as a whole, but that league exists because people are doing what you guys are doing as coaches with your team. So that's just good influence.
Yeah, and that can build on it. And to
Absolutely.
your point, if it doesn't ever reach that 70 level, what jumped out for me was that's okay because
Yeah.
I've had the experience of the 3 and the 12.
Yep. That's
And
right.
I felt that love, I felt that centering energy, I felt that context, that framework,
Mm.
and that helped me in my development and my growth, because no one's
Yes.
made it yet. Only one,
Yes.
right? Jesus is the only one who made it, so to speak, whatever it is. It certainly isn't me. So yeah, and if somebody's saying, "Oh, I can never do it," well, it starts with that 3, and it starts with that finding that, that kind of that scenario or that group that you can work with and be a part of,
Yeah.
and just the experience of it alone, you won't have to give that back.
That's right. Every experience of being involved in something creative and constructive is forming you as a person in a way that makes you stronger as a contributor to whatever next 3 you're a part of, whatever next 12 you're a part of, whatever next 70 you're a part of. Again, it's just a very organic thing. And we know that God is working through all of this. And so, that helps us continue to just have serenity, however things work out.
Absolutely. And this could be an antidote to some of the distraction or the disruption of social media,
Yep.
of 24/7 news cycles, of
Yep.
the next thing that, again, not that we shouldn't be, global citizens,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, if we've got just so much time,
Yes.
ultimately I have to decide if I want to choose that time for self-growth and self-betterment.
Yep.
Because, again, not to ignore injustice, but I believe to what you're saying is we spread this out. If this goes out, that will be the bigger change ultimately in the world, and that's what I think the Serenity Prayer teaches us, and
Yeah.
those things. I think that if I only have an hour a day, and it's either working, thinking about this, or making phone calls or sending
Mm.
emails. If I only have an hour a day, if it was focused on this,
Yeah.
it's amazing because I'll go to Facebook and I know someone's beliefs and I know they're different than mine. And then I'll read it for the something for the 100th day in a row.
Mm.
And I'll be like, "Whoa, my gosh, I
I
can't
know.
believe they said
I know.
that."
I
Must
know.
be insanity because, of course, that's how that's what they believe, and that's theirs to believe. So I'm almost a fool to get surprised by it.
Well, if I love that, and I think if that'd be what I'd want to say more than anything else to all of us in this election moment is, do we really understand how short life is? I mean, you only have so much emotional energy. You only have so many opportunities. And if your nose is glued to your screen, like just doom scrolling through tweets and the latest sensation in the news and stuff that's going on in these high up places where I, I mean, I just want to say after a while, like, really, dude? I mean, is
Right.
is this how is this when you're on your deathbed and you're like breathing on an oxygen tank and you're looking back over your life, are you going to wish you'd spent more time scrolling through all this stuff? I mean, I know that probably sounds escapist, but I mean, actually, I don't think it's escapist at all. I think it's just a summons to come back to the real world and say, wow, in the moments I have in this world, what can I do? What can I do? What's in front of me? If our country's going to change for the better, it seems to me, Joe, it just has to start with that.
Yeah. Yeah, let there be change and let it start with me,
Yeah,
right? And that's of the long view. That's a patient view,
yeah,
and without some greater context or framework, it's probably very difficult to embrace that. And I think if there was an undercurrent theme and what we've been sharing, I think it's that patience, that long view, the framework of things. And I think as a reality, there's a lot of fatigue.
yep.
It's been a long election cycle, coupled with the pandemic and the lockdowns and the fears,
Mm, tough, tough.
and division within our families, or maybe even within our marriages, and certainly in our friends. And
Yep.
it's exhausting. And
Yeah.
so, for myself, and I guess I guess that the thought is, and my hope with this is that, if somebody feels is motivated to look inside and look at these other things and focus more on creation as opposed to destruction. God's got the greater world in his hand, not mine.
Mm,
And he didn't call me last night to ask me my opinion.
mm.
But I know that I can work on these things, inside of myself. And I look forward to the day where I could actually then share that. And
Yeah.
I think God puts those opportunities in front of us, and we actually probably are sharing more than we know. But it's been a long 4 years in terms of the election cycle, because I
Yeah.
think this started four
Yep.
years ago, and certainly the last few months. And so,
Yep.
um, there's going to be probably disappointment. There's going to be more division with the outcome whenever that comes. And I guess my hope for everybody who's listening, if you're still listening, is that you can find that peace inside, and find that greater framework in God, and in these tools, and these just different things that we've been sharing with you. And Ben, I'd love to know your thought as well.
No, I'm with you, and I think for my last comment, just what you said is so helpful. When my focus is where God wants it to be, and I'm doing what God wants me to do, I find it's always energizing. Sometimes really tiring, but even when I'm really tired doing this stuff, I'm energized. And then there's that other feeling, which I've felt so many times in the last, number of months and years, as you were describing, where it's just a kind of exhaustion, where I feel like I'm internally working super hard and I'm just shot by the end. I actually feel further behind, more deflated, less motivated. And so it seems to me maybe a good index is, if what you're thinking about and what you're investing in is not at some level energizing, maybe it's time to just do some reconsidering, you know. And I think that for most of us, scrolling through a lot of just kind of election outrage, clickbait, man, if you're a person who really is energized by that, I guess good for you. But I think most people would say, it does wear on you. It really does. Because when you've invested all that emotional energy, you're not really sure what you've accomplished or what to do next. And hopefully, what we've shared here, just from our, reflections as we're working this out too, is, just maybe a way forward.
Amen. Yeah, and turn off cable news and turn on us and share our stuff.
Exactly. Now that's energizing.
Yeah, that energized to me anyway. I'm being selfish. So this has been great. This will put a wrap on our election coverage. It was something we wanted to do and share with everybody, a little different view on the election and the way to look at it. But I do think that the one thing that's unchanging, Ben, Robbie, you'd agree, is God and God's love for us and grace for us. And so no matter what happens today in the election or in the coming weeks, is that there's one unchanging force in the world, right, Ben?
Amen. And that is a comfort. So,
yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I wish you all peace and love, and thanks for being with us. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks, Ben.
Yep. My pleasure.